House's response to the controversial Texas abortion law. President Biden just yesterday denouncing the restrictive law that bans abortions as early as 6 weeks as, quote, almost un-American, and reiterated his support for Roe v. Wade. His first public remarks on the law following now viral exchange this week between Press Secretary Jen Psaki and a male reporter who questioned the president's stance on abortion.
He believes that it's up to a woman to make those decisions and up to a woman to make those decisions with her doctor. I know you've never faced those choices, nor have you ever been pregnant. But for women out there who have faced those choices, this is an incredibly difficult thing.
All right, let's bring in Heidi Prisbilla, who's at the White House for us. I watched that a lot of different times, Heidi, I got to say, that exchange with Jen Psaki. So talk to me about the president's comments on this Texas law and really what steps on a federal level that they can take, if any, to limit the state of Texas from following through.
Well, he's vowing to fight it, Yasmin. He says it's a clear violation of Roe. And to be clear, there are no exceptions for rape or incest in this case. That's a position only about 8% of the public supports. It also incentivizes citizens to report on each other with cash awards of up to $10,000. Here's what the president said about that particular portion.
The most pernicious thing about the Texas law is sort of creates a vigilante system. I am not certain. I was told that there are possibilities within the existing law to have the Justice Department look and see whether there are things that can be done that can limit the independent action of individuals.
So this would hit particular groups of women particularly hard, Yasmin. If you are a poor woman or a teen who is raped in Texas, you're going to be living in a completely different world than a poor woman or a rape victim in the state of New York. Now, as to what the president can do here, immediately, not a lot, other than potentially filing an amicus brief. He has called on the Justice Department, but they've said that the Justice Department will make its own decisions about this. He can use the bully pulpit to urge Congress to codify Roe. But again, you have the issue of the Senate filibuster that comes into play there. There's also another aspect here about what regulatory agencies could potentially do, including some abortion rights groups saying that they are hoping that there could be something through telemedicine access, for instance, to the abortion pill. But this is a short-term thing here where the president has called on his Gender Policy Council to convene, and they did on Friday, to come up with solutions, but nothing immediate.
And we're going to talk about possibly a path through Congress in just a second with Dina Titus. Let's talk about the president's plans on 9/11, which is just a week from now. I know we're learning some news about where he plans to visit.
We are learning news. It looks very similar, actually, to the path that former President Obama took on the 10th anniversary, which is to visit all three sites of impact. First, the World Trade Center in New York, here at the Pentagon in Washington, and also the Shanksville, Pennsylvania site. This comes 2 weeks after the full withdrawal from Afghanistan. The president also answering some critics and families who had wanted him to stay away from those sites until he declassified certain documents related to 9/11. Now he's gone ahead and done that, Yasmin, on the 20th anniversary here in a gesture to those families of the 9/11 victims.
All right, Heidi Prisbilla for us. Thank you, Heidi. Great to see you, my friend. To talk about what option lawmakers on Capitol Hill have to protect abortion rights, I do want to bring in now Democratic Congresswoman Dina Titus of Nevada. She is also a member of the House Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security Committees. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us on this. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Let's talk about the path through Congress, right? You heard Elizabeth Warren on with my colleague Joy talking about the fact that this needs to be made into a law. Roe versus Wade needs to be made into a law. Speaker Pelosi saying a vote will be held in the House. What is the likelihood, though, that you could actually get the Women's Health Protection Act through Senate?
Well, I'm an optimist, or I wouldn't be in this business, but we will pass it very quickly out of the House. Speaker said she's going to bring it up the first week that we go back, and it will pass. On the Senate side, of course, it's going to be more difficult. You have some of the women Republican senators who I think would vote for it, but this may not be enough to break the the stalling that what makes us have to take 60 votes to get out of a filibuster. Maybe it's time to look at ending the filibuster. You know, we've got the abortion issue that the majority of the people in this country are in favor of, and you've got the voting rights issue.
Yeah.
Again, the majority of the people. Senate won't act. Get rid of this arcane internal rule that's nowhere in the Constitution, and let's move these policies forward.
Sounds easy when you say it, Congresswoman, but obviously there's a reason why the filibuster is still there, because you have folks like Senator Joe Manchin, obviously, who are in favor of the filibuster for, as you said, publicly he has put it, especially when it comes to voting rights. So what else can be done? Is there a likelihood that folks in Congress could be more emboldened to push to getting rid of the filibuster when it comes especially to abortion rights?
Well, public sentiment is certainly on that side, and you see it across the country. They're already talking about another big women's march that would be on this issue. You're going to have a number of lawsuits filed. You're going to see, as the attention shifts to state legislatures, more and more grassroots opposition to this. So that's how you get to people who are in office, is have their voters say, we're not going to put up with it. Or with an election coming up, things are much up in the air. That public push may be what it takes.
What else can be done, Congresswoman, at this point? Because it seems like time is of the essence at this point. An NBC News article reporting the legislature in Texas now this week advancing a bill called Senate Bill 4, which would limit access to medication abortions for many. For now, though, patients can obtain the medication up until 10 weeks of pregnancy in the state. So you got multiple things advancing here in the state of Texas. At this point, what else can be done?
Well, we've got the lawsuit that put a stay on the suing the clinics. That will only last for a short time. More lawsuits, I'm sure, will be filed. But Texas is just an egregious actions by the state legislature. They've just undone 50 years of precedent. You know, this was a bench-made law. It came out of a court decision. We need to make it a statutory law, and Congress needs to act. But you'll see a lot of things taking place at the state level, kind of like in Nevada. Our Question 7 locked in the provisions of Roe versus Wade, so they couldn't be overturned without a public vote. I think you'll see grassroots groups trying to do that sort of thing at the state level while we grapple with the Senate at the federal level.
Have you heard from any of your Republican colleagues on this that oppose the Texas law?
I haven't, unfortunately. We're reaching out to them. We want their votes. We'd like for it to be bipartisan coming out of the House, but there's not a lot of people willing to step up, as we have seen from these Republicans on every issue.
Congresswoman Dina Titus, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Joining me now to talk more about this and the politics surrounding abortion rights, Juanita Tolliver, Democratic strategist, and Susan Del Percio, Republican strategist, both are MSNBC political analysts. Juanita, I'm going to start with you on this one. We are already seeing a political ripple effect, I should say, when it comes to the Texas law. The Washington Post reporting, and I want to read this for you. GOP officials in at least 7 states, including Arkansas, Florida, South Carolina, and South Dakota, have suggested they may review or amend their state's laws to mirror Texas's legislation, which effectively bans abortions after 6 weeks. Kentucky, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Ohio, and more are expected to follow. So it seems as if at this point, Juanita, this is just the beginning for this type of restrictive law that we are seeing in Texas. These Republican states now getting on board and saying, Texas has found the loophole and we're going to follow suit.
That's exactly right, Yasmin. We can expect more of this across the country. And it's honestly following the same copy and paste, the same coordinated attack playbook that we saw with voting rights. So this is when you're going to see these Republican-controlled state legislatures pushing through as many bills as possible while we have the Supreme Court doing nothing to stop them. And also while we have this question in Congress, whether or not Senate Dems are going to step up to the plate and take action into codifying Roe. And so absolutely, that's what Congress needs to do. Congress needs to act like they have public support. Congress needs to act like they have tools available to them to act. Because what's at stake right now is that any person who can become pregnant, especially if you're Black or brown, or if you earn a low income, or if you're young, you're going to be finding yourself in an uncomfortable, tragic situation, especially if you live in Texas, because the assumption that this is going to stop is wrong. And what we need to do is what Congresswoman Titus just said. continue to apply pressure to Congress to act, because Democrats especially need to recognize, no, there are not 10 good Republicans in the Senate who are going to step up and side with you on this. Yes, you have public support and need to take action to end the filibuster, to not only respond to this attack on people's right to choose as well as to terminate pregnancies, but also on voting rights, also on any other legislation where Republicans are holding up a block, because as you mentioned, Yasmin, the clock is ticking towards midterms, and there's no guarantee that the Democrats will hold the House and the Senate. And so have the power, use the power, and this is no time for hemming and hawing over the filibuster. I think the other question you asked, Congresswoman Titus, that was interesting to me, is what she wants to see from the White House. And I feel like this is a moment where President Biden needs to be full force, not just supporting the law associated with the women's health protections, but on ending the filibuster. And he needs to do that publicly and privately, to put that marker finally in the sand that this is what needs to happen, so that Senator Schumer feels empowered to whip up the caucus.
Okay, not to be negative here, just playing devil's advocate for a moment, Juanita, but who's to say that they're going to end the filibuster over this if they didn't do it over voting rights?
Well, this is where the compounded interest of advocates is really converging on Congress all at once, because at the same time that you're going to see the pressure coming from advocates about reproductive justice, you're still getting that same pressure around voting rights from a different subset of the population. And so that compounded pressure should prompt change, because these are the same people that Democrats are going to look to and say, hey, turn out to vote for me. Hey, mobilize your communities for me. Hey, make sure that we get reelected in the midterms. And they're not going to have anything to show for it. They're not going to have any goodwill, faith acts that they have put forward to show that people, that they are behind them and they're doing every single thing in their power to deliver.
I'm wondering what some of this is about in advancing these anti-abortion right laws forward, Susan Del Percio. And I speak of South Dakota Governor, Republican Governor Kirsty Noem, who essentially said, we're going to have the toughest laws in the state, the most strict laws, not in the state, in the country, right? So is this about the anti-abortion rights, or is this about politics?
Oh, this is about politics. This is about 2024. And that you see these governors who all have an eye towards running for president. And this is going to get them actually into a very precarious situation, I believe, Yasmin. A lot of Republicans are not happy with the Texas law. It used to be Republicans would be able to say, I'm against abortion, but I believe, the health of the mother, incest, rape, and that Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. So they kind of got a little bit of cover because that was the law and they knew they couldn't overturn it. Now with this type of legislation, this is draconian. This is drastic. Not only is the whole concept of putting bounties out on drivers or family members that assist women to get an abortion crazy, they do not allow for an exemption for rape or incest. So if a 13-year-old girl is raped by her father or uncle or grandfather, she is forced to have that child in Texas. I believe that the way to, kind of put some pressure on moderate Republicans is to say, this is the litmus test. Do you support a 13-year-old girl who's gotten raped by a family member, forcing her to carry her pregnancy to term? It is so egregious, and I think it runs so many
moderate Republicans. If it's so egregious, Susan, if it's so egregious, why aren't these moderate Republicans speaking up? Who are they? Who are these people that you speak of?
Well, I'm talking about moderate Republican voters, swing voters. So, for example,
any Republicans of note, any people that could make legislative changes, that could make waves in Washington to stop the Texas law.
You're not going to get 10 Republicans. You could probably get up to 4 or 5, but I don't see it getting to 10.
Because it's politics.
Because it's politics, yes. And here's the other thing. And, I think what Juanita is saying is very important about having the convergence of different interests come together and force the filibuster issue. But I also worry that too many issues make it a very loud noise where they may have had a chance to get a carve out, for example, for voting rights. Now you're going to look out for a carve out for everything. I'm not opposed to it. I've been on the air for months saying I think they should blow up the filibuster because Republicans will do it the day they get power back. There's no question in my mind to get through their agenda. So right now, when it comes to the Texas law, I actually think that a lot of Republican legislators, locally, state, even in swing districts, this is going to be a problem for them come either their primary or general election.
Well, considering where Joe Manchin is on reconciliation over the last day or so that we have learned, and we're going to be seeing some more reporting on that a little bit later on the show, I'm going to bet he's exactly the same place when it comes to the filibuster at this moment. Juanita Tolliver, Susan Del Percio, thank you to you both, guys. Very much appreciate it. So the world has had America's unvaccinated communities. The WHO is warning of yet another variant of interest. 2,000 cases of the Mu variant have already been identified in the United States. And while officials say it is not an immediate threat, it remains unclear how effective the vaccines are against it. With me now is Dr. Irwin Redlener, MSNBC public health analyst and founding director of the National Center for Disaster Preparedness at Columbia University. Dr. Redlener, thanks for joining us on this Saturday. As always, we appreciate it. Dr. Fauci said the Mu variant is not an immediate threat. But the variant's, quote, constellation of mutations suggests that it could actually evade vaccines. How worried are you?
Right. So let me just kind of back up a minute and, unpack this a little bit. So as a little quick reminder to everybody who's listening to us. So every virus mutates. Some viruses mutate faster than others, but every virus mutates very fast for influenza, much more slowly for the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2. That said, it is always around the corner that we can have a mutation or a variant develop that could cause more problems. It could be more transmissible, more infectious. It can make people sicker than the previous variants. That's why we have to really keep a close eye on this. And don't forget, a virus is not really a living thing, although it has, the DNA and RNA inside of it. The virus's purpose is to replicate, to find a host where it can grow, where it sometimes can cause very severe consequences, as we know the SARS-CoV-2 has been doing. The story with the Mu virus, by the way, some people say Mu, some people say Mu. I'm leaning towards the latter, but this variant has been discovered. It started in Colombia in South America. It's now spreading slowly around the world, including a number of cases here in the U.S. The challenge or the problem with this particular virus is that it may have the characteristics that could make it somewhat resistant to the vaccines that are out there. Much of this information, Yasmin, comes from laboratory studies. We're still waiting on actual population studies to see if the vaccine is still going to be as effective as it is with the other variants. I think it will be. And that's why the World Health Organization, WHO, has said this is a variant of interest, not yet a variant of concern. But whatever it is, we're going to have to watch it closely like we do with other variants. In the meantime, not to worry, and people should still get the vaccines that they need to get.
Wasn't Delta at one point a variant of interest?
I'm sorry, Yasmin.
I said, wasn't Delta at one point a variant of interest?
Yeah. Yes, the Delta and other variants start, if people are kind of listening or watching what's going on, they'll say it's a variant of interest. It could become more than that. And the next step up from a variant of interest is a variant of concern. And that designation has not yet been given to the Mu or Mu variant.
All right. Dr. Scott Gottlieb warned this week the Northeast has yet to have a true Delta surge. Is there a likelihood the Northeast could see yet another surge when it comes to the Delta variant? Or is there a silver lining to this or some good news to this in that after September 20th, folks can start getting the booster shot and that could possibly allow people to evade that surge?
Right. That is good news. But I do agree with Dr. Gottlieb that I don't think we've seen the worst of this, unfortunately, for two reasons. Number one, we're having the Labor Day holiday, and almost always after holidays that have a lot of people gathering together, there's a lot more spread, even if the event is outside. We still have crowding and other conditions and lack of mask wearing that could make it possible. But the other big factor, Yasmin, is that we have 55 million children who are going back to school.
Yeah.
They've already started. That'll be probably completed by mid-September. That could potentially be just an absolute pandemic tinderbox. Schools where ventilation may not be so good, where we're not mandating teachers to be vaccinated, which we absolutely should be, no exceptions. Every teacher and adult employee in a school needs to be vaccinated, because a lot of the children may be eligible for vaccine, but choosing not to get vaccinated. But the bigger problem, of course, is between 45 and 48 million kids not yet eligible for the vaccination.
Let's hope it's not a tinderbox. That is for darn sure. Dr. Erwin Redlener, thank you as always. We appreciate it. Great information there. Coming up, everybody, Senator Joe Manchin is angering his Democratic colleagues by saying they should put a pause on their $3.5 trillion reconciliation deal. Welcome back. There is a new rift inside the Democratic Party, and it comes from a familiar source, Senator Joe Manchin, the West Virginia senator, calling on Democrats to put a, quote, strategic pause on advancing the budget reconciliation bill. And progressives in the party are hitting back hard against that. The Democrat writes in the Wall Street Journal this: he doesn't think Congress should spend $3.5 trillion during tough economic times. NBC's Ali Vitale is in Washington for us following this. I can't think, Ali, that anybody was actually surprised by Manchin's stance.
Yeah, because it's not new, and it's not the first time that we've seen him do this. He made no secret about, even when senators just left Washington on recess, Manchin made no secret about the fact that he was uncomfortable with that $3.5 trillion price tag. So when you say that there's a new rift among Democrats, it really does depend which Democrats you're talking to. Moderates in the House and the Senate who shared those concerns about the price tag, they're feeling like this gives them some cover, and it also gives them the time and ability to better negotiate what they think the price tag should be. On the other side of this, though, progressives, unsurprisingly, very unhappy. Take, for example, Congresswoman Jayapal. You played a little bit of what she said, but she's the head of the Progressive Caucus, gives us a good sense of where they're at here. Take a listen.
The deal was that we deliver the entirety of the president's Build Back Better agenda to the president's desk for signing. That means that if Joe Manchin wants to have the infrastructure bill that he negotiated, a much smaller, frankly, bill that doesn't do all of the things that we need to do, then we need to come to a quick agreement on the reconciliation, the Build Back Better reconciliation package. We need to just make sure that we actually do what we said we would do for people in this moment of tremendous crises, so many crises that we're facing.
So this has been the argument of progressives the entire time. They have had people like Speaker Nancy Pelosi amplifying the message, also Chuck Schumer on the Senate side saying that this is the time to move forward on the Biden agenda, because you'll remember the traditional infrastructure piece of this was a key point for the Biden administration. At the same time, though, there's a whole laundry list of progressive priorities that are packed into this larger reconciliation bill. In terms of where this goes next, though, Yasmin, recess is still continuing. For the Senate, they've got another week. For the House, they've got another 2 weeks. In the meantime, this bill, the reconciliation piece of it, is being crafted at the committee level. This just complicates that even more for when lawmakers actually get back to D.C.
Ali, I don't know if you have any information on this, but we were talking about this at the top of the show, so I wanted to kind of throw it at you. So forgive me now. But filibuster, right, especially when it comes to abortion rights, a lot of Democrats essentially saying it's time to get rid of the filibuster and get this thing through and turn Roe v. Wade into law. Is there any sense that Manchin will budge at this point when it comes to the filibuster? Because we know how he previously stood on it.
He's been so steadfast when it comes to things like voting rights. Abortion rights, similarly, a very key Democratic issue. These two issues have been such energizing forces, not just for lawmakers here on the Hill, but when you talk to operatives and even below that, when you get into the grassroots organizations across the country, these are the issues that animate the base. I have not heard from Manchin on this. He has not released anything on this in relation to the filibuster and the right to choose. At the same time, though, when you see that these issues have really been hand in hand in terms of the way that they energize the base, you can sort of extrapolate out, and I'm not in the predicting business, but you can extrapolate out that this might be one of those things where he continues to say that he doesn't want to see the end of the filibuster because, again, he's someone who has pushed for bipartisanship, though on this, of course, you'd need to get rid of the filibuster if you wanted to do anything codifying abortion rights at the federal level.
I knew you could handle it. Ali Vitale, thank you as always, my friend. Good to see you. All right, we have some sad breaking to expose the inequities in our society in new and troubling ways, and childcare is proving to be no exception. USA Today reporter Aaliyah Wong writes about how COVID has made an already confusing and frustrating maze for low-income parents even worse. And adding to this crisis, according to one survey, a whopping 80% of childcare centers are now experiencing staffing shortages. Joining me now to dive deeper into her reporting on this is USA Today reporter Aaliyah Wong. Aaliyah, thanks for joining us on this. This is so incredibly important to highlight the discrepancies that exist that were only exacerbated by COVID-19, especially amongst children. Explain to our audience just how big of an impact COVID has had.
Right. So when we talk about the childcare crisis, we often think of the cost, the lack of supply, and the staffing challenges. The pandemic has compounded all of those things, and all of it's making it harder for parents to find childcare. You know, we think of cost as being a major hurdle, but it's really kind of at the finish line that you encounter the cost. Before that, you have to go through so many hoops just to land a spot. You have to do tons of research, and that may mean going on Yelp, calling your local childcare referral agency. It may mean just asking around. Word of mouth is still one of the main ways people find childcare. Then there's the process of calling each of these centers, finding out what their application process is, figuring out if there are vacancies. Then you have to apply, and it's cutthroat. Sometimes you have to apply over a year in advance just to land a spot, and then you have to wait to get that spot. And then, of course, as you mentioned, there are equity implications to all this.
Yeah.
Not only does it require savvy and time to go about doing all those things, but oftentimes lower income people and even middle income people, they have to fill out a bunch of other forms to get that financial aid. And notably, only 1 in 7 families who's eligible for that aid, for that aid to pay for childcare actually gets it.
There was another great quote from your piece that really stuck to me, and it was the patchwork system exists because there seems to be this fundamental belief that women should be at home with their children. You talked to a lot of women for this piece, and much of the burden of the children and figuring out childcare and dealing with all of this kind of red tape, especially during COVID, has fallen on women.
Right. I mean, women continue to shoulder the majority of the childcare burdens, and that's even if they're working full time. I think it's noteworthy that all of the parents I interviewed for this piece were mothers. They're still the people who are charged with figuring all this stuff out. If you think about the K-12 education system, that's seen as a public good. You know, you may take 15 minutes to sign up and boom, you have a spot in the public school system. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but really it's a lot easier. Childcare is not like that at all. It's really a marketplace of a bunch of small businesses operating and in competition with each other. And because it's not seen as a public good, it hasn't really gotten that infusion of public dollars. And therefore, women end up having to contend with all these barriers and figure out the childcare.
And that's obviously one thing that Joe Biden's trying to get through when it comes to the reconciliation bill is help when it comes to childcare. Just quickly here, Aaliyah, I do know some cities are trying to make some headway with this. You got Chicago and D.C. making some changes. In talking to these women and the research that you've done for this piece, what changes need to happen?
Right. So I think, first of all, just outreach, making it easier for parents, particularly parents without a lot of means, to sign up, making it language inclusive, advertising what the options are on public transportation, on the radio. Then I think, it's just making it easier to pay for it, making it easier to fill out all these forms by offering parents childcare when they're actually going through the process of figuring out childcare. There are a bunch of small fixes, but as you mentioned, there are some federal policies being proposed that would ameliorate a lot of these hassles for parents.
Aaliyah Wong, it's a great piece. Thank you. And it is so incredibly important. And